tell you a little bit about myself in a bit, but Bike Minds is a bicycle-themed storytelling event featuring positive and inspiring stories related to cycling from a diverse range of storytellers. The theme for tonight's event is Bikes and Fate, specifically how involvement in your life and your direction as a bicycle enthusiast was partially up to you, but partially up to the rest of the world. A little bit about Bike Minds. Our mission is to change the way that you feel about people who ride bikes, one story at a time. And our vision is a world where everyone can see themselves riding a bike. So we're all about changing perceptions with positivity and good stories. Our lineup for tonight is there in front of you. We have JILLIAN from Halifax, ERIN RIEDIGER from Winnipeg, SABA SHAHSIAH from Toronto, FELIX Lee from Alberta, ARCY CANUMAY from Waterloo, and GRANIGAN, also from Alberta. And just a reminder that we're always looking for new stories. This is hopefully going to be our first of many virtual events. We've run 12 in-person events so far, and this is our first foray into the virtual space, but it takes more stories to make these events happen. And you can always submit yours. We're always looking for more, and we're always keeping track of those. So I'm your host for tonight. My name is Matt Pinder. I have a pretty diverse background in cycling. I've been an advocate. I am a professional. As my day job, I have what I consider to be my dream job of designing bike lanes in communities across Canada for a company called Alta Planning and Design. And on the side, I have a passion project called Bike Minds that I co-founded with my friend Michelle a few years ago. And as I said, this is our 13th event that we've done in 3 years. So Bike Minds has really become a significant event, and we hope to continue doing more of them. So a reminder that this event is being recorded. And with that in mind, we have the chat function enabled for everyone to have some dialogue throughout the presentation. We definitely encourage participation. When you see something you like in a story, feel free to jump in and say that. But we do have moderators active who will be watching for anything inappropriate and taking action on that. So just be responsible with your chat. And then we also have the Q&A function, which you can use to submit questions to us for any of the storytellers when their presentations come out. And that is private. That doesn't get seen by the other attendees. So if you want to submit a question privately, that's the way to do it. So before we get into the stories, I'm going to kick things off with a short speech, and I want to give thanks to my colleague Army de Francia for helping to develop this. When Michelle Kearns and I started Bike Minds 3 years ago, we did so because we saw a need for change in the cycling community. A change towards more positivity, more empathy, and a more diverse representation of people who ride bikes. We saw cycling as accessible to just about anyone, but were dismayed that many groups, and especially the media, continued to portray the cyclist as a fit and able-bodied white man. So we set out to change that. We reached far and wide in search of bike stories that challenged that stereotype. And here's the thing. When you actively seek to connect with people beyond your networks who are different from you, you learn so much. This is true of all aspects of life, but especially of cycling. We created a venue for sharing bike stories that interfaced with ability, gender, identity, community, and so much more. We and our audiences continue to be inspired by the positive impacts bikes have on the lives of so many different people. But while our aim is to exclusively celebrate the positives, we cannot do this without acknowledging that many folks are being left behind in discussions about bikes. Many of our past storytellers formed their own organizations simply because they did not feel welcome in mainstream cycling groups. They didn't feel or see people like them in the leadership, and in response, they created their own bike spaces. While it is awesome that these people were able to organize and meet others like them, Their leadership and contributions are often under-acknowledged or overlooked. There are also so many others who don't even have such a space. Cycling advocacy, group rides, mechanics, and the active transportation field are overwhelmingly white and male, and as a result, biking is seen as an expensive and risky sport. This skewed representation creates systemic barriers that prevent many people from actually enjoying biking. For example, if your community group or professional circle is mostly fit adult men, how likely are you to fight for or even understand the need for infrastructure suitable for a child with a disability? While bikeability can greatly benefit communities and address other challenges, it can also be used to harm and disempower communities that have historically faced discrimination. For example, when cycling infrastructure is advocated for exclusively by white people as a way to improve underserved communities, it can become associated with gentrification and can actually displace the racialized folks who live there. Cycling advocacy, whether community-led or professionally led, has immense power to shape and influence the development and improvement of our communities. Our local governments turn to these organizations for input and feedback on all matters cycling. But with great power comes great responsibility. The responsibility to ensure that voices beyond those dominant narratives are being represented and heard. Failing to do so is nothing short of abuse of this power. Remaining passive on this is failing to acknowledge the power that white people hold over the cycling space. If we truly want to co-create inclusive bike spaces, we must make an active effort to build relationships with residents facing systemic oppression due to their race, their gender, including those beyond the binary, their sexual orientation, abilities, income, or any combination of these. Being not racist is not enough. We must be anti-racist and make a genuine commitment to welcoming all into our communities. We challenge anyone who is listening today, if you advocate for cycling improvements in your communities, to heed these words. Does your community group have diverse representation where people are not being tokenized? When you make a demand of your politicians, do you first reflect on your privilege and the impact of your requests on communities more vulnerable? Do you partner with or volunteer with organizations that focus on equity or that serve communities facing systemic oppression? Adding more voices to the cycling community will only serve to make us all stronger and more successful. Let this event tonight be just one of your many conduits into people who are different from you. And may you be more empathetic for knowing these amazing people that you're going to meet tonight. Find a story that you can relate to, but also find one that is foreign to you and learn from it. When Bike Minds started 3 years ago, I opened the first event with a question. Why are we here tonight? The answer is not just to hear great bike stories, although that is a great reason to be here. It's also to learn from each other and figure out how to make the bike world a more inclusive place for everyone. And with that, we are going to transition into our first storyteller for the evening. I'm going to introduce JILLIAN Banfield, and I'm going to ask her to come on camera. JILLIAN Banfield is Halifax's bicycle mayor, a disabled woman who found freedom of movement and the love of her life through cycling. She passionately advocates for all the things that make active transportation more accessible. Welcome, JILLIAN, and please take it away.
Thanks, Matt. That was a deeply humbling introduction to this whole event, so thank you for that. I'm so excited to be here with all of these other amazing people, so really thank you for having me. So as Matt said, my name is JILLIAN. I'm the bicycle mayor of Halifax, and this is my story, a pretty personal story about what cycling has done for me. And on the theme of fate, it's really how I never really anticipated any of it. So I start off by thinking about my bike these days as the way that I hear people who use wheelchairs often talk about their wheelchairs as freeing them. And my bike does that for me as a disabled person. So my bike's really fundamental to my mobility, and I want to tell you a bit about that and how it shaped so many parts of my life. So as I said, on this theme of fate, it was really unintentional to me, the way that my bike became such a source of mobility for me, a mobility aid, in fact. In grad school, I'd taken up cycling again as an adult after not really having done it since I was a kid. And at that time, I could still walk to meet most of my needs. But by 2011, I was diagnosed with end-stage arthritis in one of my ankles. And this probably is not a surprise because I was diagnosed with arthritis originally in that ankle in 1985, so it was a long time coming. And I didn't really realize at the time how my relationship with cycling was continuing to grow. And it was much as a way to compensate for my declining ability to walk, because it started to be quite painful for me. And in 2013, I had surgery on my foot, not the ankle itself yet, but a tiny little joint in my foot that you probably don't even know that you have. And this is an MRI of that surgery after I had it done. And that surgery took care of the pain I was having, the most exceptional pain I was having, but it also further reduced my ability to walk. And so I really had grown to love cycling over the years, and I was anxious to get back on my bike after my recovery, and a long winter had passed. And talking to my orthopedic surgeon, he really encouraged me to cycle. He actually told me to buy a really nice bike and put off any further surgery like an ankle replacement as long as possible. And so I was nervous on the streets. My stamina wasn't great, after surgery. And I was living at the bottom of a substantial hill. But I'd moved back to Halifax recently, and I really wanted to enjoy my hometown again and just get around. And so when Bike Week 2014 came, I was really excited. There was this group ride scheduled, and it was a 15-kilometer around the peninsula ride. It would be the longest ride I'd ever done. So it was this beautiful sunny Sunday morning. I rode down to the waterfront. I didn't know anyone. I'd never done this kind of group ride before. And we set off. And after a few blocks, this cute guy starts talking to me. It's the guy on the left in this photo. He's actually in the right photo too, just aged a little bit. But in the left photo here is actually from the day of that ride. And you can't see me, but I'm in the back of this photo, this selfie he took while he was riding. So he started talking to me, and we chatted for the rest of the ride, and we chatted over coffee, and we had a date the next week, and then we just did bike ride after bike ride together that summer. And so I met Dan, my partner, literally while I was riding a bike. So it should be very obvious to me by this point that most of the important things in my life are somehow tied to cycling. And I just put this photo on the right because it's a cute photo of us from like 5 years after this first ride. So this was our vacation to Charlottetown last summer. So the other thing that I did on the same day that I met Dan was to join the cycling coalition. So I became a member of the Halifax Cycling Coalition, and I soon attended their annual general meeting, found out they were looking for new board members, and I signed up because I'm kind of a joiner. And I was well on the path to advocacy at this point. So I didn't really know it at the time, but I was also on the path of finding my family and my community here in Halifax. And after my term on the board of the Cycling Coalition, I was still really fired up and passionate about all of the things. So I ended up joining two of the city's committees, the Active Transportation Advisory Committee, but also the Accessibility Advisory Committee. And I just wanted to stop and say advocacy can be a slog, but sometimes you eventually get protected bike lanes. So this is a photo from this summer as the Hollis Street protected bike lane is going into Halifax. It's not quite done, But as you can see from the transport truck behind me in this photo, that we desperately need protected bike lanes, and advocacy and cycling stuff can be, it can just take forever, but yeah, sometimes you get the win. So this is just a reminder to me to keep doing what I do. But it's also through advocacy that I found my friends and my family, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but I also want to talk about some of the obstacles that I face as a disabled person. You know, you see snow in the bike lanes, and I've had people tell me to just go around it or kick it out of the way. And I'm like, I have end-stage arthritis in my ankle. Like, the fact that there are literal obstacles in my way to cycling is part of what keeps me going. And these ableist kinds of signs that we have posted throughout the city, these are the things that keep me going. But what really keeps me going is my bike friends, my bike family. My friends who send me pics of their kids on a cargo bike. Or a few weeks ago, I actually ran into my brother taking my nephew for his first bike ride. I have friends tell me stories about how they cycled and they found it easier to do that while they were pregnant than to walk. And it's so these people, like all of these people in these photos that I'm showing you now, who I've met through cycling, and it's their stories that really keep me going. It's through these people and through cycling, I find more people and I find more stories. And it's really that empathy piece that Matt was talking about, by finding out about people, finding out about the mom who lives in the suburbs and just wants to ride her bike to the library. Like, isn't that a thing she should be able to do? So I used to think of myself as kind of an introvert, maybe somebody who doesn't super like people a whole lot. I know we all have those moments. But these stories really kind of cracked me open. When I hear these stories that people, of challenges that people face in just wanting to transport themselves by bicycle and feel that freedom of movement and the joy of cycling, I really do feel that overwhelming sense of empathy, because I know what cycling has done for me and I want other people to have a chance at it. And frankly, I want more dogs on bikes. And I know this is a cheap shot, but this is my dog, Tilly, and she's adorable, and we got her on a bicycle, and it was one of my proudest moments. And so I just want to say, I know maybe it sounds like a bit much to find so much meaning in cycling, but it's really just that bikes have been a tool for me to connect with other people in ways that I'd never really thought possible. So thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Jillian. That was so awesome and inspiring. And yes, you're always going to get points for putting a cute dog picture into a presentation. Just a reminder to the audience to please submit your questions as we go, but I'm going to ask the first one here selfishly. So you have kind of talked about how being someone living with a disability affects your ability as a cyclist, but you've also sat on an accessibility advisory committee. So how does your experience as a person who rides a bike influence how you talk to other people with disabilities? And have you found that it goes the other way as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And part of the reason that I serve on both committees is because I think accessibility and mobility just go hand in hand. And, you know, a lot of the haters out there who are against bike lanes, or the media or whomever, will try to pit cycling against accessibility. And they'll, you know, the trade-off they want to claim is that cycling or bike lanes make it harder for people with mobility devices to get around. But if you actually find out about what other concerns are for accessibility and people using wheelchairs, or, you know, concerns about sharing multi-use paths, that kind of thing, then I think you can really find a lot of connection between the two and how they can facilitate each other. And it's really changing the narrative around what those two kind of seemingly opposing things are.
Great point. And I see another great question from Donna Patterson. How did you become the bike mayor of Halifax? And just so everyone knows, we have another bike mayor coming up tonight too. So she is not the only one.
Yeah, I was appointed essentially. I suppose, yeah, people might be curious about bike mayors in general. There's an organization in the Netherlands, of course, called Bikes, BYCS, and they facilitate a network of bicycle mayors throughout the world. And so I knew that they did this, and in consultation with the Halifax Cycling Coalition here, they kind of asked me if I'd be interested in being nominated for that. So I did have to apply essentially, but there was no competition at the time. There was no election. They just kind of let me do it.
Very cool. And I'm sure anyone interested can go to that website and find out more.
Yeah.
So I think we'll move on to our next storyteller for the evening. You'll get another chance to ask Jillian questions when we get to our group discussion at the end. But for now, I'm going to introduce our next storyteller for the evening, ERIN RIEDIGER. ERIN is an architectural intern from Winnipeg with a passion for humanist architecture and safe, equitable cities. ERIN's podcast, Plain Bicycle, follows a group of Canadians who traveled to the Netherlands to fill a shipping container with secondhand Dutch bicycles with the hopes of importing everyday cycling culture into North America. And I will add that I am a huge fan of the podcast, and that is how I found ERIN. It is a wonderful story, and I'm sure we'll get a preview tonight, but everyone else should check it out. Take it away, ERIN.
Thanks, Matt. So the theme of this Bike Minds chat is bikes and fate. So I'd like to talk about the events which made me an unintentional cycling advocate within the context of my podcast, Plain Bicycle, a podcast which tells the story of a group of Canadians who traveled to the Netherlands to bring back a shipping container of secondhand Dutch bicycles in an attempt to influence everyday bicycle culture in North America. The first episode of my podcast is called I'm Not a Cyclist, I'm Just Riding My Bike. And this sentence summarizes my philosophy on cycling. Before I had been to Europe for the first time, about 10 years ago, I was interested in riding my bike for transportation, but had difficulty seeing myself in mainstream bicycle culture. The people I saw riding bicycles for transportation were mainly men in athletic wear, riding with traffic. When I saw women riding their bicycles in skirts to and from the store, work, or social events, I realized that this was something that I could get into. After this, I started riding my bicycle to work and to social events in the warmer months. When my car broke down in 2016, I began riding my bicycle more often for everyday transportation. Expanding past the work commute, I realized how easy it was to ride to the store or to meet up with friends. And what started as a necessity became a pleasure. I haven't bought another personal vehicle since. I do drive occasionally, but I use car share and I bike, walk, or take transit when appropriate. In 2019, I started researching the Plain Bicycle Project for a podcast mini-series I was interested in recording. This fun side project turned me into a Plain Bicycle customer, and more recently, a member of the Plain Bicycle team, as my passion for everyday cycling became hard to separate from wanting to tell a good story. In Winnipeg, we have a cycling mode share of 2%, which means that 2% of trips in my city are taken by bicycle. Even in North American cities thought of as cycling hubs, the cycling mode share is still quite low. In Minneapolis and Vancouver, it's 4%, and in Portland, it's 6%, when in contrast, in the Netherlands, about half of all trips are taken by bicycle. In Amsterdam, the mode share is 48%, and in Utrecht, where most of the Plain bicycles come from, it's 51%. So why is this? Well, it comes down to a few things, and I'm sure we're all familiar with the infrastructure problem. Protected bike lanes make people feel safe and comfortable while riding. Secure bicycle parking also helps so that people can leave their bicycles unattended for extended periods of time. But what people don't talk about as often is the tool. So this is access to simple, easy to ride, practical bicycles that allow people to carry about their everyday tasks without needing to change clothing. Bicycles can easily carry groceries, sporting equipment, and even other people. The Dutch bicycle, or the fiets, are specifically designed for the rider to do any task by bike. I've heard these bicycles disparagingly called grandma bikes, but that's actually what they're called. Fiets directly translates to grandma bike, and the Dutch exhibit the slower, casual riding style with pride. The step-through frame is standard. Sometimes in Canada, we hear this called a women's bicycle, but the frame shape makes it easier for anyone to step on and off the bike and load things on the front and back without having to swing their leg around. Fiets typically come with all of the accessories and attachments you need to ride comfortably. Front and rear racks can carry goods, hold baskets or boxes, and easily attach to child seats. Fenders, a full chain guard, and a skirt guard allow the rider to use the bike in any type of weather in everyday clothing. Although Dutch bicycles are the perfect tool for everyday transportation, especially for trips under 5 kilometers, similar styles of upright bicycles are hard to find in North America, especially at a lower price that's accessible. After seeing the bikes in action in the Netherlands during an artist residency, a few Winnipeggers I know got an idea. What if they could bring these tools for safe, affordable, clean transportation back to Canada and begin to foster an everyday bicycle culture at home? Before they even returned to Canada, Anders Swanson and Leanne Perry made a website and got to work. The Plain Bicycle Project was born. The idea was simple. Get a minimum of 100 Winnipeggers to commit to pay a few $100s for a second-hand Dutch bicycle. Plain Bicycle would then travel to the Netherlands and fill a shipping container with refurbished Dutch bikes and ship it home to Canada. So how do you find second-hand bikes in the Netherlands? In the Netherlands, there are more bikes than people, and people treat their granny bikes more as a tool to get around than a prized possession. Often bikes are left abandoned at train stations, parked illegally, or lost in the sea of bicycles. So the city impounds them at their local Fiets depot, and if the owners don't claim them within a few weeks, they go to auction. The Plain Bicycle Project team traveled to the Netherlands in 2017 with knowledge of these auctions, but they had trouble making the right connections to get access to them. So they spent 2 out of the 3 months of their trip scouring secondhand stores for bikes, but the prices were a bit high and they weren't able to get the volume that they needed. Finally, they gained access to an auction in Utrecht. From this, the team was able to form a friendship with the Fiets Fund, who organizes the sale of secondhand bicycles in Utrecht, and they were able to bring back more bikes than they initially planned in the first shipment. The relationship Plain Bicycle formed with Martin and Ruud at the Fiets Fund during round 1 of Plain Bicycle has allowed them to continue to grow the project beyond 1 shipment. After some challenges around the logistics of international shipping and some unanticipated questions from Canadian Customs about the agricultural import of dirt on old bikes, the shipping container arrived in the Canadian prairies. In the summer of 2017, over 100 Dutch bicycles were set to hit the streets of Winnipeg. The Plain Bicycle Project was never meant to be a single round. If the influence of bringing the tools for everyday transportation was to have lasting effects, they would need to see the project scale. This meant multiple rounds of bringing bikes back from the Netherlands in hopes of influencing the culture of bikes and the bicycle market in Canada enough so that Dutch bikes can be found at home. In 2019, the team successfully executed round 2 of the Plain Bicycle Project. Recently, amidst the COVID-19 crisis, Plain Bicycle brought a 3rd shipment of bicycles to Canada, and what seemed like a risk in uncertain times became an opportunity as the demand for cycling as a safe form of recreation and transportation resulted in a global bike boom. Today, the project has supplied over 350 Winnipeggers with Dutch bicycles. The Plain Bicycle Project hopes that the influence of the project extends past the bike itself and becomes more about the idea, so that more people end up biking for their daily activities, and an everyday bike culture becomes less niche, more regular, and unremarkable. In his opening speech at the launch of round 2 of the Plain Bicycle Project, one of the founders, Anders Swanson, says, "This is not a bike shop, this is a culture bomb." And that's truly what the project is about. Plain Bicycle isn't about commerce, even though they do sell bicycles. It's about the idea of bikes. It's about how having access to low-cost, simple forms of transportation can make cities more equitable, more social, quieter, cleaner, more pleasant places to live. I've also heard Anders say, this project is also about giving people a super fun time. The Dutch view of cycling is that it's something for everyone, and no matter who you are or what type of bicycle you ride, you should have access to cycling. The Plain Bicycle Project gives people an opportunity to see what upright cycling looks like and feels like, so they can see how easy and comfortable it is to experience the city from the seat of a bicycle. The Plain Bicycle Project has changed my life. Even though I used a bicycle for urban transport before, I didn't understand just how comfortable and simple it could be until I sat on my beautiful rusty Omofiets. These bicycles left abandoned 6,500 kilometers away in Utrecht have been recycled in a place that doesn't share the same bicycle culture, but where people can begin to understand something about cycling and urban life that they didn't have access to before. Riding a Dutch bicycle has simultaneously made my city smaller and larger. I realize most trips are completely manageable by bike, so where I could travel without driving was expanded. I realized I could ride from my home in a central neighborhood to my parents' house on the southwestern edge of the city in under 45 minutes. I realized I can get to the largest mall in the city in about 15 to 20 minutes. I can get to the grocery store on my bike in under 5 minutes and load up my Omofiets with groceries that the bike carries for me. And now I enjoy all of these trips much more than I ever had before. My love for my Omofiets grew larger during COVID-19, as every night my partner and I explore the streets of our city from the seat of a bicycle, and we've noticed parks, buildings, trees, and details we've never seen before. Riding a bicycle is transportation, but it's also stress relief and fantastic for your mental well-being. If you'd like to hear more and meet the personalities behind the Plain Bicycle Project, I encourage you to give my podcast, Plain Bicycle, a listen, and it's available on all major podcast platforms. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Erin. Wow, what a super inspiring story. My first and quick question is, with a few hundred of those bikes around Winnipeg, I'm sure you must instantly recognize these other bikes when you're biking around the city. What's that moment like?
Yeah, it's actually really fun because you feel kind of like you're in a secret, not so secret club. So when I do see a Dutch bike, I'm usually like, if I'm with someone else, I'm like, Dutch bike. And then a lot of times I'll ring my bell at them and I'll be like, oh, hey, ring my bell. And then from doing the podcast, like I've met some of the customers because I've interviewed some of them and just chatted with some of them at the events. So sometimes I do actually kind of know them in a way and we say hi, and it's nice that way.
Super cool. We have a question from Michelle, and it's about bike security. So you mentioned in the Netherlands, people don't care about their bikes that much, and that's because their value is fairly low and it's pretty easy to find another scrappy old Dutch bike. But bring those bikes here, and any bike that you buy here, we have a bit of a problem with bike theft. Mm-hmm. So Michelle's question is, a barrier to using bikes in Winnipeg is fear of having it stolen. How do we advocate for more secure parking spaces?
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things where if you need to advocate for it by talking to your city councillor, but another, at least in the Exchange District in Winnipeg, another leader in providing more bike parking has been the Exchange District Biz. So if your neighborhood has a biz, I would also recommend talking to them about saying, hey, like I like shopping in this area, but there's no bike racks here. Like, do you have any available? Sometimes they do have money for that. So that's another thing. And just having a good U-lock, even though this isn't an advocacy thing, as I'm sure a lot of us know. But it's also, I think, sometimes mentally getting yourself out of the fact that your bike is so precious. So with these Dutch bikes, like they do feel precious because you love your bike so much, but a part of having it is supposed to be that, you know, if you lose it, it's inexpensive and you can get another one and it's not the end of the world. So yeah, I would say if you're not getting anywhere, a lot of the street space with secure bike parking is controlled by or able to be aided by the bizes and the businesses themselves.
Cool. I think we're going to keep moving with the next storyteller for the evening. Thank you so much, Erin. That was an awesome story. And I'm going to now introduce our next storyteller, who is SABA SHAHSIAH. SABA is a member of BIKEPOC, a social cycling group creating safe spaces where BIPOC women, trans, femme, and non-binary identifying folks in Toronto can ride their bikes and be empowered together. Riding a bike for her is an act of resisting the status quo and a tool for her independence and agency.
Thank you, Matt, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. As Matt said, I'm Saba. I'm deeply grateful for the organizers of Bike Minds for creating this platform where we can share our stories, and I'm super excited to hear the rest of the contributors as well. I am a member of a group in Toronto called BIKEPOC. We're a local community cycling group. We host group rides, social events, and cycling-related workshops for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, specifically who identify as women, femme, trans, or non-binary. Our mission is to create a safe space free from racist and sexist microaggressions, where we can simply just enjoy each other's company and enjoy the benefits of a social bike ride without those types of interference. On April, oh, there's a picture missing. On April 28th, 2019, we hosted our first ride. We rode from Christie Pitts Park to Allen Gardens, where we had a picnic and shared some of our cycling-related experiences. And soon it became pretty clear that we felt a mutual need for this type of safe space, and that we needed to continue doing this, or going ahead with this project. A lot of our stories resonated with each other, and a lot of our experiences overlapped. We had a total of 7 participants, including 4 organizers, so we had 3 people show up, but it was still something to keep us going. So since tonight's topic is bicycles and fate, I would like to talk to you about how bicycles, for me, have been fated to be a tool for activism and resistance, and the bike has become a tool for agency and relative independence for me. And I do want to point out that to me, I think that a bike is just a tool like any other tool. It doesn't in itself inherently possess any of these characteristics. It's not necessarily democratizing on its own. It entirely depends on how this tool is wielded. And so in other words, how the bike is used and who is using it. And as we've seen over the years, and most recently, bikes can also be weaponized, and they can be used to intimidate protesters and in general to subjugate voices of dissent. So in this regard, my identity as a woman of color within the North American context, working visibly within the for-profit cycling industry, and me riding a bike for leisure and transport is automatically an act of resistance. I don't think I have a choice in that. It's the juxtaposition of those two realities. And I'd like to use my personal story in a roundabout way to illustrate how and why that is the case. So my parents fled Iran with my sister and I in 1985 in a refugee-like situation during the Iran-Iraq war. My dad was working in the Middle East's largest nuclear power plant at the time, which was being heavily targeted. We could hear jets flying overhead overnight, and things became very unstable and dangerous. Like most other war situations, there were shortages of all kinds, including, food shortages. We had food stamps. My dad set up a chicken coop in the backyard. And yet, I'm told by my parents that nobody tried to fight over toilet paper. All kidding aside, though, the situation was dangerous, so new laws were also being passed that would seriously restrict the human rights of women, including my sister and I's ability to study certain subjects and our right to mobility. In other words, we would probably never be able to ride a bike, for example. And so my parents, wanting a different future for us, decided to flee the country. They left everything behind, and that's how we ended up in Hamburg, Germany. We eventually moved into a university residence for students with families. My mom got her first adult bike there. She carted us around in a child seat in the front of the bike because number one, it was accessible economically. And number two, she was moving around a lot from the university where she was learning how to speak German and taking us to daycare. When I turned 4, my dad taught me how to ride a bike, like most German kids, in my future schoolyard, which is in the picture. I'm just gonna fix the screen here. And later on, even if he hadn't taught me, cycling is so important to Germans and so much part of the culture that in grade 4, there were lessons in the school, and this was sort of the passport that we were given for safe cycling skills. And it was certified and stamped, and we had something attached to our bikes as well, which is pretty cool. I remember watching the fall of the Berlin Wall on TV that same year, and I had no idea what I was watching. I just remember people rushing this wall and embracing and taking a chisel and trying to dismantle whatever this wall was to them. And my favorite part was this guy, this musician on stage performing the wall, and I later found out his name was Roger Waters, and it was Pink Floyd playing live. One of the side effects of the Soviet Union crumbling was that Russian-owned goods flooded the market. Since my parents couldn't afford a German-made car, my mom was finally able to buy a Russian-made red Lada. I remember she had to put in her entire upper body to be able to turn the steering wheel. It was so hard. And at the same time, I outgrew my bike. We ended up driving more often than not and walking around. And as another side effect of the Cold War ending, German nationalism was heavily on the rise. And because I was walking and not using a bike, which I had outgrown my bike at the time, I ended up encountering several neo-Nazis, or having several neo-Nazi encounters on my walks home, which is the first time I'm talking about this publicly. The first time I had my hair set on fire, and the second time there were firecrackers thrown at my feet. And at my best friend's 10th birthday party, she's pictured here in this photo, we were outside playing a game on the street, and we ended up being chased by neo-Nazis with baseball bats. And some of our white German friends, especially the boy on the left, were beat up pretty badly and hospitalized as a punishment for hanging out with a half Nigerian and Iranian girl. I didn't understand what was happening, but I felt a deep sense of injustice. And I think that was a really pivotal moment for me, where I learned that what it meant to be othered, and that we were not welcome in the only place I ever thought of as home. I understood that even though I had 2 legs like the other German kids, my access to mobility was not my issue, but I could no longer freely move about this space the same way that German children were able to occupy the same space. I wasn't safe to do so. Thankfully, by a stroke of luck, so fate maybe, my parents decided to buy me a bigger bike at that time. And I noticed that I wasn't afraid of moving about on the bike. So I was able to explore spaces that I wouldn't have if I was walking. So that is one way that the bike became a tool of agency and independence for me. It allowed me to move around. So before this becomes too long, I'm skipping ahead here. So things became really unsafe and unstable in Germany. A lot of houses where refugees and asylum seekers were housed were set on fire, especially in the part of Germany where we were. Within a couple months, there were 10 building fires and many, many deaths, including families and little children, and it was just unstable. So my parents applied for immigration to Turtle Island here, and we moved in 1996. So just to wrap things up, even though I rode a bike since I was 4 years old, and bikes were an integral part of my lifestyle, and I've had bikes ever since that were either gifted to me or, you know, secondhand or whatnot, I never set foot in a bike shop until I was 30 years old. And looking back on it, I know that it was because I never felt safe to enter that space. As a woman and a person of color, I never saw anybody that looks like me. And I avoided bike shops because I was afraid of being othered again and re-experiencing those feelings of xenophobia and not belonging or being talked down to. So I just avoided it altogether. It's a miracle that I never had a flat tire in all of those years because I had no idea how to fix one. Under the sort of safe wing of an ex-partner who's a white white cis man who was working at a bike shop called Duke Cycle that some of you know in Toronto, I finally walked into the store and bought my first bike for myself, and I got into road cycling. And later on, I was offered a job by Gary Duke. I still work in the same building. And I think that my existence there has not been, well, it hasn't been easy, but it's started to change some things. The people that I encounter often don't see me as a source of valid information because I don't fit the archetype of what a cyclist looks like. But through fate, I met Kieran, the founder of BIKEPOC, in that same building. We were able to work together, and she started the group, and the landscape within that shop has changed drastically since then. We have a much more diverse staff. And to wrap up, a couple of things I wanted to mention here that I really have learned and noticed in Toronto, even though I'm not very involved in the cycling advocacy sphere. I noticed that there are a couple narratives or common narratives that we tend to circulate around. One of them being sustainability and green transport, the bike as instrument of urban decongestion. And then there's a topic of access that where most of the solutions offered for issues of access are either economic solutions where either bikes are offered or tools are offered, or it's entirely infrastructure related issue, which are both really important. But I think from my experience, what I'm trying to say is that it's not always a matter of economics or infrastructure. It is the culture that has to change and the social constructs that often prevent us from participating, or that prevent Black and Indigenous people and women of color, especially from participating and feeling welcome. And so the good news is that we just had our first ride of 2020. The group of participants tripled and grew exponentially. And I think that our existence alone is hopefully making little waves and ripples and making it more welcoming for other folks that look like me to want to participate. And we even had a little cute doggo participate. And thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Saba. That was such a powerful story, and wow, you've had a lot of life experience, and thank you so much for sharing that today. And thanks for your bravery in starting BIKEPOC in Toronto. It must have been a little bit disheartening when your first ride only had 3 people, but now look how far you've come. That's awesome. So my question for you is, we have people tuning in today from probably smaller communities across Canada and the US and the rest of the world who maybe also feel like they aren't represented in their local cycling culture. Do you have advice for anyone who might feel inspired or want to do something similar in their community to create space?
Sure, yeah, thanks to the power of the online sphere, there are lots of really great groups. Our founder from BIKEPOC reached out to a group in the States called Friends on Bikes, who've been integral in supporting us with both in terms of like giving us advice on how to organize and how to maybe launch a website. So they can feel free to reach out to us too. I think it's going to be surprising how many other people are probably going to be interested in such a group. And even if it's just 1 or 2 or 3 people, even one person, honestly, it's enough to start something, I think.
Yeah, that's great. One more question from Kayla. Do you have any tips or ideas for ways that local bike shops can make their space more welcoming? Because you mentioned that, you know, there was a barrier in place that kept you from feeling comfortable there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't have the full answer because like hiring practices are important. Actually hiring BIPOC folks to work at the shop and offering training and eliminating those barriers to accessing those skills that people need to actually be able to work in a shop are hugely important. But it's also important to create a safe space, to not just hire one person, because that's tokenizing and that can make that person feel unsafe too. It has to be more than one. There are other ways to maybe also include the community by having dedicated rides that create a safe space that are led by other BIPOC folks. I think it's really important that the initiatives are led by people who are intimately familiar with the experience on a personal level.
Very, very insightful. Thanks. So thanks so much again, Saba. If we were in person, I would ask the audience to applause, but maybe everyone can clap at their homes virtually. And I'll let you go and we'll introduce the next storyteller for the evening.
Thanks so much.
Who is Felix Lee. Felix is a quirky cyclist who is passionate about all things single speed. He is a racer, an organizer, and a Cycling Canada official. He lives in rural Alberta with horses and chickens and cats.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me here. It's really eye-opening to be part of these stories here. As you mentioned, my background is racing. I started racing in the early 90s at the dawn of mountain biking, basically. Let's see here. Share. And I have a lot of lifelong friends from that, and I really wanted other people to be able to experience that in the racing culture. And it was very interesting to start being a little bit more part when as I grew older, to see how cycling evolved for me, and it became something more of a tool when I started commuting more. My wife is not passionate about bikes at all. She loves horses. I'm here in our barn, and you might even see a horse pop head out, make an appearance. So that's her passion, and that being that, we are out in rural Alberta here to make that happen for her. And if anyone who's ever had horses knows that it takes a lot of ingenuity and a lot of dedication, a lot of resources. And as a lot of you know, cyclists have that. So it seemed to work out fairly well that we could make this happen for her. Now, I had one of those good oil field jobs for quite a long time, and we saw a lot of the things that makes rural Alberta great, but also some of the shortcomings that make it difficult for cyclists, mostly recreational, because that's the most that I'm involved in, to be truly appreciated in small towns like Olds and Sundre, where even now the tides are turning and people are starting to really see that cycling is a great recreational sport, but also as a tool to get around, to give mobility to people who, you know, don't want to have something like a pickup for every single chore, which is really commonplace around here. My commute to work is about 7.5 kilometers, the first 3 miles on gravel road, which can be quite difficult, and then another mile and a bit on the highway. Was very odd for me to have a lot of vehicles sort of leaning into me, because they were very surprised to see a cyclist out on the highways in rural Alberta commuting to work every day. But over the years, they've seemed to have appreciated that there's other users to the road as well. There's a small bike community in Olds that seems to be growing all the time. Most of us are racers, or people like to go fast. We have fast road bikes that are fancy and light. But there's also a change because Olds has a very strong, visible minority community. The soft gel manufacturing plant has a very diverse background of people who work there, and really starting to see a lot of people who have been watching me, which is very encouraging, commute year round, even through Alberta winters, start to see it as a way of not having to have to drive to work a few kilometers. So now that I've sort of found my way back to cycling, I had a bit of an off time when I was working in oil field, but a lot of the friends I had from the early 90s and when we were racing, we're back together again. And that's one of the things I really want to share about racing and cycling in general. We've all gotten a lot older. We don't ride quite the same as we used to when we were racing. But a lot of us are now commuting full time as well, even in Calgary, in the Kootenays, and myself in rural Alberta. There just seems to be some magic about being able to take that time between your regular life and your job on the bicycle to change your pace, clear your mind, and in the wintertime, experience that magic of riding in fresh snow. And I don't know how to make my town better for commuting exactly, and that's part of the reason why I'm here, is to get some ideas from all the presenters here about how I can make Olds a better town for cycling, not just for the people I work with, but also for my children who are just starting to ride a lot more as well. And just sharing some photos with you here of my bike commute. I've also made some friends who aren't so human. This Swanson's Hawk here has been a companion of mine in the summertime for my commutes for about 3 years now. They have a clutch of young hawks, and as well as another pair who are nesting in my yard. They're not as social as this one here. But so I feel like being here is an important step. It's kind of difficult for me to be presenting like this because I'm not used to being in front of the camera. I'm used to being the person in the background, but I really wanted to step out of my comfort zone and see what other people are doing to help make cycling more prominent. In Alberta, our race association has an arm that is supposed to be dedicated to cycling for everybody, but I never seem to see exactly what we're doing to do that. So I took it upon myself to branch out a little bit and see what everyone else is doing to help make cycling for everyone a lot more accessible.
Thanks so much for sharing, Felix. It's really inspiring to see that even in small communities, cycling can play such a big role in people's lives. And I can't believe that you got 4 pictures with you on a bike with, is that a hawk in the background? That's pretty incredible.
One hawk that is quite curious about my daily commute. There's quite a bit more, but those are some of the good ones.
That's awesome. Okay, one quick question for you. We're a little bit behind schedule, so I'm going to just keep it to one question. You mentioned that it kind of sounds like others are seeing you and your winter bike commuting and feeling inspired to do the same themselves. What does that mean for you? Or how does that make you feel?
It's a little bit scary to see people looking at me, maybe critically, but also as an inspiration. I'm very much not a public person. I don't like speaking in public like I am right now. It's very difficult for me. But it also feels good that there's some progress being made here, and that the pathways that are in my town, which are kind of disjointed, could one day be fixed so that we could all enjoy them, cycling and other multi-use users of the pathway. So I'm really hopeful that we can all benefit from this, and not just me and my children, but everyone in the town.
Awesome. What a great message to close on. Thanks so much, Felix. I'm going to now introduce our fifth storyteller, fifth of six, ARCY CANUMAY. ARCY grew up cycling on the neighborhood streets of Metro Manila in the Philippines. For 5 years, he lived in Tokyo, Japan, and regularly cycled to the train station and around his neighborhood. Now in Canada with his family, he is the bicycle mayor of Waterloo and is actively working with organizations and the community to make cycling a safe transportation option for everyone in the city. Welcome, ARCY, and I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Matt. And thanks for everyone, the Bike Mind team. For my presentation, I will be sharing my bike story and how I keep rediscovering cycling at every turn. I'll start my story in 2004 when my family and I migrated to Canada from the Philippines.
So sorry to interrupt, ARCY. Are you trying to share a screen? We can only see you right now.
Okay, sorry about that. I missed that part.
No problem. This kind of stuff happens at the in-person events too.
I think it's because of the beer. Can you see my presentation now?
Not yet, no.
Okay, I'll just start it now.
There we go.
Okay. There we go.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, as I mentioned, my bike story starts in 2004 when my family and I migrated from the Philippines here in Waterloo, where I found work, and I started just walking to work. It was about 25 minutes from our apartment, and I walked to work every day. And after like a few weeks of walking, I decided to buy a bike. There was a Canadian Tire near my office, and it cut my travel time in half. And the big bonus is I was so happy being able to bike around my new city and discover different places. I like cycling in Waterloo that even when the season changed, I still continued biking during winter. And one day there was this thing called like a freezing rain warning, which is like coming from the Philippines. I didn't really think about it. So like this rain, and I just went about preparing for work, and then went down our apartment with my bike. Somebody saw me at the lobby and said, "Hey, are you sure you're biking today?" And with a smile, I said, "Yes, I'm biking." Then halfway through my ride, while crossing Bridgeport Road East here in Waterloo, I slipped and swerved. At the corner of my eye, I can see like the cars like heading toward me. And for a split second, like I felt like maybe this is it. It was so dangerous. But I kept the handlebar straight and recovered on the other side of the road. That was definitely a very close call, but with our title of the theme, Fate smiled at me that winter morning. After work, I just decided I just have to ride a bus home. The following year, we welcomed a baby girl into our family. We also bought our first car in Canada, and I drove to work. And with that development, unfortunately, I stopped actively riding my bike. It got me thinking, like, where else did I not choose to ride my bike? When I was in Tokyo or working in Tokyo for 5 years, I rode a bike. It was just so easy riding my bike, going to the train station. And it was like a no-brainer. It was also very expensive to park in the city. And I remember when I was younger in the Philippines, I just rode my bike everywhere. My mom would be mad because I will always be biking until late at night. Going back to Canada, I joined Sustainable Waterloo region here in our city, first as a volunteer, then as a staff member of the Travel Wise program. I think this was around 2014 or 2015. With Travel Wise, we promoted commuting in Waterloo region. And one of the priority was is to promote cycling together with riding transit, walking, and carpooling. TravelWise started a series on Twitter to celebrate commuters of Waterloo region. We used the hashtag CommutersWR, featuring people who sustainably travel to work. I went around the region and interviewed different people. This is where I met Scott, a public school teacher in Kitchener who regularly bikes to work and cycles around the region. And as I was interviewing him and he was sharing his bike story, I was really so inspired and realized how I miss cycling. After the interview, I told myself I have to bike again. And that's what I did. I became very active, and the following year, as we celebrated Bike Month in June, I was biking even more, going to events and joining bike rides with TravelWise member organizations. And one of the biggest events was organized in University of Waterloo, collaborating with their sustainability office. This is where I met Herbert, a staff member of University of Waterloo, and we started cycling during weekends. He's a bike commuter and can easily go long distances, but he was very patient and rode with me on short bike rides. We became good friends and biked mostly on weekends, going to Elmira, St. Jacobs, and other towns near Waterloo. And even now, during the pandemic, we would bike during the weekend. As I biked more, I was definitely happier. I felt happier and healthier, but I think I felt like there was something like missing. I wanted to reach out to my community and really promote cycling. And in late 2019, I discovered the Bicycle Mayor program. This is something that JILLIAN mentioned earlier. And it is a global initiative to accelerate the progress of cycling in cities and help get another 1 billion people onto bikes. Bicycle mayors are a catalyst to bring together the public and private realms to uncover the massive economic, health, and environment benefits of increased cycling. And this is when fate smiled again, because I became the bike mayor of Waterloo, pursuing my passion for cycling advocacy. Bike mayors are uncovering new ideas, working with others to deliver action, and promoting innovations that support better cycling for all. And this is something mentioned by JILLIAN as well. If you would like to be a bike mayor of your city or nominate someone, check out bikes.org. There's a link there that goes to like the bike mayor page. Just click on that link. And as a bike mayor, I planned and organized my first project early this year. It was around January, February 2020, I started planning for a project. And it was working with partners, including like the Waterloo Public Library, the City of Waterloo, Cycle WR, our cycling advocacy group here in Waterloo. And we organized a movie viewing called Motherload. This movie captures a new mother's quest to understand the increasing isolation and disconnection of modern life, its planetary impact, and how cargo bikes, really cargo bikes, which is so cool, could be an antidote. So you can see there were about 30 people who attended that event, and it was it was successful. But little did we know that the lockdown would start the following week. And when the lockdown started, it was very tough physically and mentally for me staying and working at home and just going out for essential purchases. But cycling made it fun. I was biking, and I was really biking more with my daughter and son, which was pretty awesome. I also decided to buy a bike rack. so that I'll be able to securely carry more items, and noticed that I was really biking more and barely drove the car the last few months. And even during the pandemic, we celebrated Bike Month in Waterloo. While physical distancing, I was able to organize a bike ride with the mayor of Waterloo, Mayor Jaworski, and also our ward councillor, Jen Vazic. We biked around uptown Waterloo and checked out some parts of the cycling network in the city. I was able to also schedule bike rides with nearby cities of Kitchener and also Cambridge. And during the bike ride, we discussed current and future plans for their cycling network. It's always fun to do the bike rides, especially in summer weather. And but the most exciting project here in our region right now is really the COVID bike lanes, which was established last month. And it was led by the region of Waterloo and supported by the community. We worked together to establish a 30-kilometer long set of bike lanes in different locations in the region. There are so many exciting cycling-related developments happening in Waterloo region, and I cannot wait where cycling will take us in the future. And I hope I'll be able to share those developments with you also in the future. Thank you very much, and feel free to reach out to share cycling ideas and discover and discuss collaborative opportunities. Maraming salamat, or many thanks in Filipino.
Thanks so much, RC. That was so inspiring. And I have to say, you have a contagious smile. I really love the positivity that you were just emanating.
Thank you, thank you. The beer, I think, helped a bit. Thank you,
well, thanks so much. And because we're a little bit behind schedule, I'm going to go straight into the next speaker.
Yes.
Thanks again, RC, and I hope other people will look into the Bicycle Mayor program. So I'm going to introduce our final storyteller for the evening, Kelly GRANIGAN. Kelly is a professional engineer by trade. In her personal life, she's passionate about the environment and finding creative ways to save a little more money while increasing overall happiness for her family. She lives with her partner and 2 kids in Edmonton, Alberta. Edmonton is a very car-centric city, but Kelly and her family find joy in moving about via foot, bike, and transit year-round. Over to you, Kelly.
Thanks, Matt, for the introduction. And thanks to the other storytellers. Your stories are really inspiring. This is my story about how I went from growing up in a rural Alberta oil town to car-free in Edmonton. On the topic of bikes and fate, you may be surprised how my childhood in northern Alberta helped me become a winter cyclist. I grew up in northern Alberta in Fox Creek, right about there. It was a rich oil and gas town where my dad worked at the nearby gas processing plant. It was surrounded by wilderness. We spent much of our time outside, mostly because there was nothing else to do. My dad would go for long bike rides on the highway. I biked around the town for fun. I was exposed to biking, but only as entertainment, exercise, and sport, not transportation. For transportation, I mostly got around on foot. It was 2 kilometers from our house to downtown, where my mom owned the local dollar store. Because the town was so small, there was no reason to drive to get around. The winters in Fox Creek were cold and snowy. I remember walking to school and being told it was minus 50 degrees Celsius. I assumed that was with the wind chill. I remember my eyelashes freezing together on the short walk to school on occasion. In the winter, we went tobogganing and cross-country skiing, continuing to spend our time outdoors. We embraced winter because there was nothing else to do. It set the foundation for not only knowing how to survive the winter, but to enjoy it. When I moved to Edmonton and went to university, I continued to get around by foot and learned how to use transit. biking didn't occur to me as a form of transportation, and biking in the city felt dangerous and scary. I took many long walks because I enjoyed walking. My partner lived on the other side of the river. We would get up early and I would walk to his apartment and then he would walk back to mine. I kept the joy of being outdoors, of getting around under my own power from when I grew up in a small northern town. When I graduated university, my parents bought me a brand new car. I was thrilled. My partner and I moved out to the suburbs. We were tired of living next to ambulance bays, fire stations, and street racers, and tired of sharing walls with people who made loud thumps at night. We had 2 cars, a house, and a huge yard. We lived in a cul-de-sac with no sidewalks in the Edmonton suburbs. This is the unlikely place where our journey to becoming car-free began. Before I headed back to work after our first child, I had read a Mr. Money Mustache post about biking to work. I realized I lived within biking distance to work. I hadn't biked in 12 years, but motivated by money and health, I started biking to work on the nicer days. After our second child, I spent a bonus from work on an e-bike to make it easier to pull 2 kids in a trailer. The e-bike made it easier to bike in the wind and the rain too. And soon I was thinking about biking in the winter. I had no fear of snow or cold. I had grown up embracing winter. I had continued to cross-country ski after moving to Edmonton, and I used my cross-country ski clothes to start winter biking. And then I got the rest of the family hooked, even the kids. This video is the first time my eldest biked in the winter, a little over 2 years ago. We have tons of fun biking in the winter. We visit the Christmas lights at the legislature every year by bike and blast music out of a Bluetooth speaker. We have taken the kids on long bike rides around Edmonton, both under their own power and on cargo bikes. We've come to the realization, as I'm sure many of you have, that biking is the fastest, funnest way to get around in a city. Biking was saving us money while increasing our joy. I'll admit, it's not all fun and games biking in the winter. This picture is from when I was biking down our alley with 2 kids in the box, and we did a complete 180 and ended up on our side. The thing about falling on the box bike is the bike doesn't fall completely flat. I ended up straddling the bike, still standing, and the kids ended up giggling in the box. Don't worry, we put seatbelts in there. They are strapped in. I have also crashed into a snowbank in the box bike, and I've been thrown off my cruiser. Fortunately, none of us have been seriously hurt. The great thing about winter is we are well padded. After I began cycling, I became more involved in the cycling community in Edmonton. In Edmonton, and I know in other cities too, Coffee Outside meets up on Friday mornings, even in the winter. This group of friendly people changed my mind on a few things. I began to care more about the environment and more about our impact on our community. Motivated by concern for the environment, my community, my health, the health of my family, and the desire to save money, I wanted to be able to get around almost completely without a car. A move closer to transit and a job change later. We sold both our vehicles and we're now car-free. I like the phrase car-free because it really does bring a lot of freedom to our lives. We find ways to move around that we hadn't thought of when we owned a car. We enjoy the reduced stress and increased savings of not owning a car. We enjoy being outside. We embrace the winter. And the lessons of my childhood in that small northern town helped us get here. Thank you. You're on mute.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And congratulations on your evolution and bringing your kids in and having fun slips and slides in the snow too. it's a very good point that everyone is much more padded in the winter, so you have a bit more insulation for these kind of things. We're going to transition to the final bit of our evening tonight, and I'm going to ask all of the storytellers to come back on screen with their cameras. We had originally intended this would be more of a group discussion with the audience submitting some questions, but because we're just about at time, I'm going to ask one question for everyone. I opened tonight's event by challenging the attendees of tonight to find a story that is not just similar to you, but find someone that is different from you and learn from them. So my question to all of the panelists now, the storytellers for today, is what have you learned, maybe one thing that you've learned from sharing your story tonight and from the other stories that you've seen? And to make it easy, I'm gonna go to ERIN first.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned that came up in a few stories was how was actually talking about access to transportation and how biking is a really good option for newcomers to Canada, especially when you're arriving in a city that might be car centric. So and it seems like the default option, but then it was interesting to hear a few stories about people who decided to bike to save money, and then I think with ARCY's story, then he was like, oh, now I can afford a car, but then came back to cycling for other reasons. So I think it's interesting because sometimes it gives people access to transportation, but then I think there's also this part of cycling that people really find joy in. So even when you can afford a different form of transportation, there is something that can bring you back to cycling.
That's right.
So I thought that was really nice to hear.
Cool. So ERIN, you learned from ARCY. ARCY, who did you learn from?
I think with everyone with the story, I think cycling from the different stories is we have our own experience, but there's some really cool value of being able to bike. We experience the benefits, but then we don't stop there. We want to share it. Like, why just me being healthy and having fun and biking with my kids when a lot more people can hopefully do it? And I think the different stories would show that, from the snow to the fun stories. And I like Jillian's love story as well. And I don't get to actually chat with Jillian being a bike mayor. We would see each other during the webinar and just attend the webinar, but learning that from her is awesome.
Thanks, ARCY. How about you, Saba?
Yeah, I think I took a little bit of something from everybody, to be honest, but I think that coming to cycling mostly from a standpoint of it being a necessity, I did also find the common thread of the joy of cycling, even for those folks, like ERIN said, that can afford other modes of transportation. There's something that keeps us coming back. And I'm especially inspired by Kelly's story to really bite the bullet this year and put on the right clothes and get out there on my bike. As they say, there's no bad weather, just bad clothing. So I think this year might be the year.
Nice. And how about you, Kelly?
I didn't know that bicycle mayors were a thing that you could get your city to sign up for. So I'm going to be following that link that Jillian and ARCY shared and try to get Edmonton a bicycle mayor. I think we need one.
That's great.
You can be it, Kelly. It can be you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, over to you, Jillian.
Yeah, I mean, like everybody, I picked up things from everyone, but I was just reflecting on Kelly's story in particular, because I cycle in the winter too, and it's very much out of necessity. Like I talked about, my bike's my mobility aid, so it's not something I just put away because the weather gets bad. Like I figured out how to do it in the winter too. But just Kelly's perspective in particular made me think about how we talk about like North American car culture and how we rely so heavily on cars, but she's, you know, very much like a sort of prototypical Canadian, like cold weather, like get out there and embrace it, and has channeled that into cycling. And I just I'm wondering how we can kind of use that for the haters in our communities who claim we can't have cycling because we have winter. So I'm just thinking about that a little bit.
Very cool. And last but not least, Felix.
I really like the idea that we have to be more inclusive for everybody, and cycling can really do that for us. I only have a taste of it. I mean, people say when you're riding a bicycle on the highway, you know what it's like to be vulnerable. You know what it's like to be a minority and being a visible minority in Alberta. I've had a taste of that, but it's really opened my eyes to how many other people really could benefit from the open-mindedness that everyone has here towards everybody, and how cycling can be a real leveler for everybody and just make us work together that much better.
Yeah, very, very cool takeaway. And I think a takeaway for me is how much influence a single person can really have over their lives and their communities. And every one of you tonight has, you know, shaped your families, your communities, your peers, and just brought change. And I hope everyone watching tonight takes away that message that you can make a difference in your own community to make cycling more inclusive for everyone. So let's end with, I want everybody who's at home watching this, because this is what we would do if we were in person, to give a big round of applause to our storytellers. And I want all those storytellers to feel that round of applause, the clapping and the reverberation in the room. Yeah, we've got people typing claps. That's awesome. So thank you so much, storytellers. Your stories really just brought so much joy to myself and everyone else who's listening. That was awesome. I'm just going to end with a few quick thank yous, because it wasn't just me that brought this event together. I had an amazing team of volunteers. We've got Kayla and Robert on the IT side that made the Zoom event possible. We have Suzanne and Christine and Rie, who coordinated and liaised with our storytellers. And we have Jerry, who helped me with all the promotion. Special thanks to Robert, who is my colleague and lending us the Alta IT Zoom webinar account to make this possible tonight too. And then anyone who was inspired by these stories and wants to share a story yourself, please go to our website, bikeminds.ca, submit your story, because we want to do more of these events, but we need stories to make that happen. And we're really excited to see what comes out of it. So thanks everyone. Thank you storytellers. Thank you attendees, and have a great night.
Thank you, Matt.